Gospel Tangents is supported by users like you. Please support us at gospeltangents.com or on Patreon. Welcome to Gospel Tangents, the best source for Mormon history, science, and theology. I'm Rick Bennett. Hey everybody, I gave a presentation about a month ago to a Community of Christ group. Every Monday night they have a Book of Mormon Perspectives Forum. And Paul Debarthe from the Community of Christ asked me to give an update since the big March 5th sale of the Kirtland Temple and properties in Nauvoo and that sort of a thing. So this is a presentation I gave to them, and I thought I would just share it with you guys. So check out the presentation. So as you all know, on March 5th earlier this year, the LDS Church purchased several properties from Kirtland and Nauvoo specifically. And Paul asked me to talk about the changing stewardship and how things have been going. So both good and bad. I know many of my Community of Christ friends are very sad at this change of ownership, and I'm sad with them. And but hopefully there'll be some good and bad that we can discuss on the recent change of ownership. I've been really lucky this year because I've been able to go to both Nauvoo and Kirtland, and so I've just been really lucky to visit both properties. So now it's letting me change here. So of course, many people in the LDS Church were ecstatic to know. I mean, the crown jewel of the whole transaction was, of course, the Kirtland Temple. And so, the LDS Church has had a history of proselytizing with, especially with historic sites. And so on March 6th, the day after the announcement, Gary Boatwright, I don't actually know him. My friend Jenny Lund had posted this, but I thought it was very interesting. And so Gary wrote on Facebook, several people have reached out to me regarding the announcement yesterday about the transfer of Kirtland Temple and several historic Nauvoo properties from the Community of Christ to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. While this news is received joyfully for many, I imagine it is a sad and difficult decision for our friends in the Community of Christ to part with these sites. They have lovingly and professionally preserved these sites for many, many years. They welcomed hundreds and thousands of people to these places and shared accurate and inspiring tours of these sacred places. Several have expressed gratefulness that the sites can, quote, now be cared for properly. To that I ask, have you visited the sites? The Community of Christ and their staff cared for these sites just as my colleagues and I would have. They preserved these sacred places, maintained them, and kept them beautiful and welcoming for all who came. I have never seen these sites poor or unkempt condition. They have been immaculately maintained over the years and are beautiful places to enjoy the Spirit of the Lord. Some have expressed gratitude that these sites will now be open to visitors free of charge. I too am grateful for that, but also was proud to pay the fees for tours of these sacred places. It was money well spent. The funds collected were used to preserve these historic sites. I am grateful and proud to have made several small contributions to the preservation of these historic sites over the years. I plead with my Latter-day Saint friends to be grateful for the professional and loving care and respect shown to these sacred buildings by the Community of Christ. Please be respectful and understanding of how our friends in the Community of Christ are feeling. Please express your thanks to them for all they did to preserve these sacred places that are meaningful to those of both faiths and many others whose religious roots trace back to the Restoration. So I couldn't have said it better. Like, I know it has been a very trying time, especially after March 5th when this was announced, for my Community of Christ friends. And I just want to thank you all for the wonderful preservation that you've done. And that with the change of ownership, there's always going to be good things and bad things, and I'm going to highlight those. But I'm so grateful for the loving care. Gary couldn't have said it better, and that's why I wanted to quote him on this. So anyway, I thank my community of Christ friends. This thing is not letting me change slides. There we go. Now, soon after that, Kyle McKay, who's the LDS Church historian at the Mormon History Association, of course, had to talk about this, momentous event earlier this year. And so he said some really interesting things. In the past, I think one of the big concerns with the LDS Church owning these sites was the LDS Church has been they've always used these sites for missionary work and conversion, and so there was a big concern that when the LDS Church purchased Kirtland Temple and some of these other sites, that the LDS Church was going to turn them into missionary sites, because that's what people are used to, because that's what we've always done. And so Kyle said in this address that they weren't going to be like twisting people's arms. He joked about, we're not going to let you out here until you give us a referral to somebody. And so a few years ago, apparently, and I didn't know this, with COVID, a lot of things changed, but nobody knew about them because of COVID, and nobody traveled. So a lot of the historic sites in the LDS Church were previously operated by the missionary department. And so, of course, with the missionary department, there's a proselytizing aspect and that sort of a thing. And so they've actually been turned over to the church historical department. And so I think that was news that most people weren't aware of. And so the idea was these were going to be more historical. With the Hill Cumorah pageant and with the Kirtland Temple and things like that, it was discovered that the people who went to these sites were generally LDS. And so, especially with Hill Cumorah, he kind of talked a little bit about that as well, I remember. And he said, why are we proselytizing to people who are already members of our church? So there was a decision made probably 5 or 6 years ago that we're kind of preaching to the choir. And so we're going to make these more historical in nature and less proselytizing. So that has to do with Hill Cumorah and Kirtland Temple and things like that. And of course, people were also concerned, with good reason, I will say. I don't know, recently, I should have put it in my slides here, but the historic Salt Lake Temple with all of the beautiful murals and the pioneer ancestry. Salt Lake City sits on a big earthquake fault, and so they knew that if there was a big earthquake, then the Salt Lake Temple probably wouldn't stand. And so a lot of those interior walls and artwork and things, I wish they had run this by the church first, but they said they were going to renovate it, but they didn't. They've renovated things in the past, but they basically gutted the inside of the Salt Lake Temple. And so there was a big concern, and the Salt Lake Temple still closed. It's been closed for 4 or 5 years. And it's not going to be the same as it was. Like, it's going to be beautiful. I'm sure it's going to be beautiful, but those murals, they're gone. They were photographed. And for me, as a person who loves historic buildings like this, it's such a tremendous loss. And they actually did a similar. They announced a similar thing with the Manti Temple, another pioneer temple, and luckily, they announced it at the time, and people raised a ruckus and said, "No, you can't be tearing out all the murals and everything." And so that one was saved from gutting, and so that we're happy that. A lot of people are concerned the same thing was going to happen with the Kirtland Temple. Nobody can say anything, but the good thing is the agreement between the Community of Christ and the LDS Church as part of the sale was the Community of Christ is still going to have access for 15 years. They're going to visit up to 6 times a year, I think, special Community of Christ events and that sort of a thing. And the pledge is to keep it open as it has always been. Now, so I know people are still concerned about it, and I think with good reason they should be concerned about it, especially just after what happened to Salt Lake Temple and the St. George Temple and some of the other pioneer temples and what was going to happen to Manti. At this time, I would say for a minimum of 15 years and hopefully forever, the LDS Church is not going to do anything to the Kirtland Temple, and the pledge is to keep it open as it has always been open. And so, anyway, that was very interesting to hear Kyle McKay speak about that back in June at the Mormon History Association. So, what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about the Kirtland properties that were part of the transaction, the Nauvoo properties that were part of the transaction. There were a lot of documents and artifacts, and I think well over 100. We're not going to cover all 100, but I'm going to show a few of them. And since this is the Book of Mormon Perspectives Forum, I wanted to tie in a Book of Mormon tie here across the Mississippi River. And so we'll talk a little bit about that, and then I'll open it up for questions and comments at the end. So, so some of the pros, the Community of Christ, and I find this a little bit funny. Community of Christ had a policy that you couldn't take photos inside the Kirtland Temple. I don't think it was enforced very well, but that was kind of the official policy. And so now with the LDS, with the change in ownership, the LDS Church is allowing you to take photos. And so we have photos here. This middle picture I love because these are the original seats in the Kirtland Temple. And of course, on each end, you have the Aaronic priesthood and Melchizedek priesthood pulpits. And so I've got pictures of those as well. And so that's really interesting. It's funny because every other temple in the LDS Church, you can't take photo. Even for the open house, they're like, no photos, no photos. So it's really strange that this is the one temple that they're like, hey, take as many photos as you want, because they don't do that with any other temple. And so it's kind of funny how that works. The Kirtland Temple obviously is aging and it needs some money for preservation. We talk about the Salt Lake Temple, it's 100 years old, and they just did a major renovation. And the Kirtland Temple, probably, it was built of stone, and I don't think I put any of those pictures in here. I was able to go on a tour when Sunstone was back there. I won a contest, and so the construction standards of 1840 are very different than the construction standards of 2024. So, and I'm glad that Kirtland, as far as I know, isn't on an earthquake fault, because it would probably fall down. You can even see, I think on the next one, oh, maybe here, I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. No, maybe I didn't put it in there. Okay, we'll back up. But on the outside of the Kirtland Temple, you can see the cracks in the stucco. And so that's obviously going to need to be repaired. That white stucco, maybe I should go back to the original first slide here. That you can kind of see a crack right here, if you can see my mouse. The original Kirtland Temple was not white. It was actually kind of bluish gray, and it was supposed to look like granite. So in a lot of ways, it should look a lot like the Salt Lake Temple. And it was Artemis Millet who had patented the technology, because they actually painted in lines to make it look like cut granite, because that's what they wanted it to look like. And so Kirtland didn't have any granite nearby, but Salt Lake did, and so Salt Lake was actually made out of granite, whereas Kirtland was supposed to look like granite. And so so obviously the exterior is going to need to be fixed soon, and And then one more point along here, you can see here that contest that I won. Um, I got to go up to the top of the temple and see the bell tower. Now, the top floor, even when I went there, it was probably about 6 years ago. I think it was before COVID, and we could only go up the stairs one at a time because they were worried about the stairs not being able to handle, a lot of people. And so one of the interesting things is you can see this picture here on the right. There used to be a rope coming out of the ceiling there, and the rope was connected to the bell. And I remember some of my friends, Seth Bryant and Tom Kimball, had rung the bell, and the rope is now missing. And the reason why is because they're concerned about the structural stability. Obviously, that bell is very heavy, and we'd hate to have that come tumbling down. And so that's another case where um, they removed the rope for safety reasons. And so anyway, hopefully, right now I think they're kind of doing a structural assessment and trying to figure out, what can happen. I will also mention here really quickly with the St. George Temple. Um, oh, I should have taken more pictures of inside the Kirtland Temple here. But they've got that big assembly room on both the first and the second floors. I guess actually, let me back up here. You can see here where the white boxes are. Back up. They have a similar. They don't have boxes, but they have similar things. And it was on the third floor, or maybe the fourth floor. I think it was the third floor of the St. George Temple. And for decades, number one, it was never air conditioned, and number two, the floors were so unstable that they wouldn't let anybody up there. And so with the recent renovation of the St. George Temple, which I'm sure cost millions of dollars, they added air conditioning, which made it very nice because St. George can be very hot. But it was also bad with all that heat. It didn't help preserve the building either. So with the restoration of the St. George Temple recently, the LDS Church added air conditioning, and those floors are now you can meet in there, and so they have an assembly room just like this in the St. George Temple. And so it's wonderful when you can do these kind of structural repairs. You can do that sort of a thing. So that will be one of the good things. Obviously, the LDS Church has a lot deeper pockets than the Community of Christ, and so they will be able to hopefully restore these things and hopefully not gut them. So this is a question I have for my Community of Christ friends, and so if any of you know the answer, you can please come off mute and answer this. On the picture on the right there is the Joseph and Emma Smith home, which, you've got the Kirtland Temple, and then you've got the cemetery in between, and then you've got Joseph and Emma Smith's house. Now, when I went there to Joseph and Emma's house, I don't believe, but I'm not sure. I don't believe that this house was part of the sale, because it's now owned by the LDS Church, and I don't know. Does anyone know if that house is part of the sale? It's now open for tours, but it was my impression that it was not part of the sale. Does anyone know? I'll take that as nobody knows. Okay. So at any rate, I will say that in Kirtland, so this was really fun to go through, and I have more pictures, but I didn't want to take forever. The other thing that was part of the sale was the old Community of Christ Visitor Center. And so I know that in talking with some of my Community of Christ friends, that was felt like it was a big loss. If we had to sell the temple, why couldn't we keep the visitor center? And so, but that was part of the sale as well. And so, if you've ever been in there, if you walk through the front door, they've got a room in the back with a huge window there that you can see the Kirtland Temple, and it's just really beautiful. So, um, anyway, that was part of the sale as well. I was trying to look around for some other properties. Now, I mentioned earlier, you can see here that this is old Kirtland Village. This was not part of the sale. This was owned previously by the LDS Church. And so you got the Newell K. Whitney store. And then you can see inside the Newell K. Whitney store. I want you to notice here all of the merchandise and everything in here. And there was nothing for sale, but you can see that the shelves are full. I want to contrast that with the red brick store in a few minutes. So I'm just gonna reference that, that there was the shelves are full and everything. Of course, in the Newell K. Whitney store, you also have the School of the Prophets, which was upstairs, and this is where the word of wisdom was revealed after all the brethren were smoking their pipes and throwing them in the fireplace. And so, but once again, this was a previously owned church site. And then of course, down here, we have the sawmill and the ashery. They would make potash in this building on the right, and then the sawmill for the building on the left. And so, so as far as the proselytizing, I will say that so this one compared, so the older sites, they don't proselytize as much as they used to when the missionary department was in charge. Now we've got the historic preservation, but there's still focus a lot on faith, and they want everybody to have a good experience there, a good faithful experience. They're talking about the scriptures and that sort of thing, but it's not. If I were to share my preference on whether I like Community of Christ tours or LDS tours, I would pick the Community of Christ tours. I think they do a better job. So the LDS are getting there though. So it's not as proselytizing as it has been. They're definitely more historic, and they do give you some more facts. But I will say I prefer Community of Christ tours. So kind of the quality of the tours depends a little bit on the missionary. One of the things that was very frustrating to me at Old Kirtland, and this is a site that's been owned by the LDS Church for decades, if not more, maybe a century, is one of the things that was really irritating was they want you to follow the tour, and you always have to start in the visitor center, which I didn't show pictured here. And so, for example, so I got really irritated because I wanted to see, this is the Newell K. Whitney house, which is across the street from the Newell K. Whitney store, which I just showed you. And this is the John Johnson Inn. So the interesting thing about the John Johnson Inn is they knew what it looked like on the outside because people had taken photographs of it, but on the inside they had no clue. And so it's basically kind of a museum. In the old tours, they used to conclude here because they had kind of a museum here, and but it's now closed. Now that we can actually go to the temple, they should really come up with something to do with the John Johnson Inn. But so this missionary here in the middle, it was kind of funny because I believe, if I remember right, they walked out of the Newell K. Whitney house and they walked across the street to the Newell K. Whitney store, and I was a little miffed because I wanted to just join the tour in progress. I'd actually been there the day before, so I'd watched the film, and they're like, "No, you can't do the tour until you watch the film." And I'm like, "I've already watched the film. I don't need. I just watched it yesterday." They didn't care, and so that to me that was kind of, LDS Church is very correlated, and they've got to do these. Our house is a house of order, and I was like, I just want to see stuff. So the funniest thing was I was not nice to this gentleman here in the middle. And I wanted to go see the John Johnson Inn later, which was locked and closed. And so it was kind of funny that I was a little rude, I will admit it. And so, oh, thank you, Deb. And so anyway, I went to the went to see if I could get a tour of the John Johnson Inn, and then the same guy that I was rude to was very kind and let me go inside the John Johnson Inn. So anyway, I apologize for being rude. But it just it's a little bit frustrating when you're like, I already saw the film. I don't need to see the film again. I just want to go in that building. And so they're very, I would say, a little bit more controlling than my Community of Christ friends. Deb, just uh, going back a couple of slides here, I asked if the Joseph Smith home. Well, there's two Joseph Smith homes. There's the one in Nauvoo, and this is the one in Kirtland. And I know the one in Nauvoo was transferred, but I'm not sure if the Kirtland one was transferred.
I Googled the Kirtland. It was Kirtland. It said it was.
Okay, so this one was transferred. Okay, so those are fun. That was a fun little tour, and so I would definitely recommend that as well. So anyway, so I thank this fine brother here for letting me blow off a little bit of steam and still being nice to me and taking me through the John Johnson. So, but I don't know. Sometimes we can be a little controlling in my church. So let's move on to Nauvoo. So I will just say here, and I wish I had pictures of inside the red brick store. I could have taken them. I don't know why I didn't, but the shelves were empty. And so I kind of showed you the Newell K. Whitney store because you saw all the shelves. And so when I had gone, you can see this picture on the right with Locke Mackay. He's got his mask on there. This was right after COVID at the Mansion House. But the red brick store, when the Community of Christ owned it, like it was a bustling place. You could buy sarsaparilla and root beer and Joseph Smith for President T-shirts, and it was just a bustling place. And so now, when you go there, with the LDS Church, they took all the stuff off the shelves, and I was just like, and there were like 8 of us in there, and I was just like, this isn't nearly as bustling as it used to be. And so I was a little bit disappointed with that. Now, one of the things that was a little frustrating to me was that the missionaries were incorrectly saying that when the Community of Christ sold the properties to the LDS Church, that there was an agreement between the LDS Church and the Community of Christ that the LDS Church could not sell merchandise. And I was really surprised to hear that. And so luckily, Locke Mackay, I had texted him the night before I went and said, because I knew that he used to live in Nauvoo, and I don't know which house he lived in, but his house, it was a historic house, and it was part of the sale. And so he had to move. And I said, is this true? Is there really an agreement that we can't sell stuff? And Locke said, it is not true. So, but he told me what the real story was. So now that the LDS Church owns basically all of Nauvoo, except for the cemetery, and I'll talk about that in a minute, that's still owned with Community of Christ. And Locke gave me a tour there. We'll talk about that in a minute. But also all of Kirtland, the LDS Church is now basically a monopoly in Kirtland and a monopoly in Nauvoo. And so because the LDS Church is a monopoly, it would actually trigger a federal lawsuit where if the LDS Church decided they wanted to keep selling sarsaparilla and root beer and Joseph Smith for President T-shirts and all the stuff that they used to sell at the red brick store, also in Kirtland they used to sell stuff as well, that they would have to go through all the property records, and it was going to be just ridiculously expensive. And Locke told me that if the LDS Church had wanted to sell stuff, it would cost $300,000 just to file. And so the LDS Church was just like, you know what, we got enough money, we don't need to sell stuff. So anyway, some of my LDS missionary friends were a little bit snooty about that, like, we don't need the money, anyway, it was kind of annoying to me. But anyway, it really was more of LDS just didn't want to get tangled in the lawsuit, and we got enough money, we don't need to worry about that. But yeah, the red brick store was very disappointing, especially compared to after to when the Community of Christ had owned it. It was kind of fun. Mansion House, you can tour that now. You can see this was when Community of Christ still owned it, so you can kind of see the slight difference in coloring on the sign. It's kind of a bluish green when Community of Christ had it, and now it's a solid blue sign with the LDS Church and the change of ownership there. I'm trying to remember if I had any other things. The Smith Family Cemetery. You can see the picture of me and Locke Mackay there in the middle, and behind us, well, we've got the graves over here of Joseph, Emma, and Hiram, and then of course behind them we have the Joseph and Emma Smith, the homestead they call it. And so the homestead was part of the purchase agreement, but the Smith Family Cemetery stayed in Community of Christ hands. And so that's probably the only what I would call major piece of property in Nauvoo that the Community of Christ owns. And Locke gave me just such a wonderful tour. I did not know that, if I can go, well, you can kind of see where Joseph, Emma, and Hiram were buried, when they built a dam in Keokuk and it raised the level of the Mississippi River. And you can kind of see the Mississippi River there in the background here by the cemetery. And so they were worried about Joseph, Hiram, and Emma's bodies, and so they moved them. They dug them up and moved them to where they are now. And and there's also, I think everybody goes for those 3 graves, but there are also some other Smith family graves in that area. And then I was surprised to learn, according to Locke, that there are ancient Indian burial graves on that property as well. And so that's, the date like from 1,000 years ago. And so all this whole area is not just the Smith family cemetery, but it's also a Native American burial ground as well. And so, and there are some other, you can kind of see these people here on the right. There's some graves over in that area as well. And so that was, we'd probably have to get some ground penetrating radar or something to find out more about the graves that are there. But there's probably hundreds of graves in addition to the big 3 with Joseph, Emma, and Hiram. So where are the paintings of David Smith? Also, where are the Rogers painting? I'm going to get to the Rogers painting there, Carol, in just a minute. I'm not sure about the paintings of David Smith, so we'll talk about that in a little bit. Let's see here. All right, so I had to include this photo for Paul. Paul, I think you're wearing the same shirt, aren't you?
No, this one has red at the bottom.
Okay. A very similar shirt. So you can see the 2 bottom photos are when me and Steve Pineacre on the top right visited with Paul. I got the date on here, June 8th, 2022. So this was about 1.5 years before, almost 2 years before the purchase. And so so you can see Paul was doing a great job of supervising the dig here. And then this picture, the top left, is what it looked like when I saw it on July 17th, 2024. And so it's got a little picket fence around it, and it looked a lot better when Paul had it in shape there. So of course I did have to ask, I know Paul had previously, back in 2022 when me and Steve visited it, he said, oh, I'd love to, after the archaeological dig, because I know they were finding type and things like that there. Was that where the blue paper was, Paul? Did you find it at this site?
The paper? What paper are you asking?
On the when you introduced me, right after you introduced me, there you showed a girl who had found some blue something.
Oh, it was red transfer print.
Okay.
Yeah, beautiful red transfer print that indicated it was a residence, not just a Times and Seasons building.
Okay, so it was at this same site.
Yes.
Okay. So I did ask if they were going to ever restore this building and rebuild it, and the answer was, we don't know, but I hope they do. I hope Paul's dream comes true. That would be a lot of fun. So anyway, it doesn't look, like I said, doesn't look nearly as good as when Paul was taking care of it, but
thank you, Rick.
oh, I didn't mean to. Let's see here if I can. Is it going to play there? There we go. Now, this kind of goes back to Carol's question a little bit. I just wanted to give kind of a brief summary of the major properties purchased. So as far as real estate, everybody knows about the Kirtland Temple, the Smith family homestead, the Mansion House, the Nauvoo House, or what I like to call the Bideman House. And that reminds me of one other thing. I mentioned earlier that the quality of the tour depends a little bit on the missionary. Of course, these are unpaid missionaries. I believe I call the Nauvoo House the Bideman House because it's literally across the street from the Smith family homestead. And when I went there, the LDS missionary kept calling it the Bideman House, and he said it several times. And so after we walked out of the house, I said, "Oh, I think it's called the Bideman House," and his response kind of surprised me. He goes, "I don't care. I want to say Bideman." I thought that was kind of funny because he wasn't that interested in historical accuracy, and I'm like, you got to say it right. But anyway, so hopefully that doesn't happen anymore. But it happened when I went there. As far as significant documents and artifacts, and I will show some pictures of these because some of them are many of these are in Salt Lake City now. The Joseph Smith translation of the Bible, 7 letters from Joseph Smith to his wife Emma. The John Whitmer history of the church. I thought that was interesting. Original portraits of Joseph and Emma Smith. Those are the Rogers portraits, and I'll show those in a minute. The cornerstone of the Nauvoo house, the original door of the Liberty Jail, and I'm going to show that door, and the famous characters document, which I know you guys have been studying for a few weeks here on the Book of Mormon Perspectives forum. So I would like to show some of those now. So the artwork, these are the David Rogers paintings, the famous paintings. These are hung, and I'm trying to remember, it's not the Church History Library. I think it's the Church History Museum. So you have the Joseph and Emma paintings. They're not side by side, but you've also got this, one of my favorite paintings by Walter Rain. I guess this was on loan from the Community of Christ to the LDS Church, and then the LDS Church purchased it. So where Christ appears to Joseph and Oliver in the Kirtland Temple. So I just think that's it's one of my favorite paintings. I just think it's really cool. And so that was part of the purchase as well. We have here some documents, and it was funny because I wanted to see the ones that looked like they were in the worst shape. So you can see here the top left, this was a letter from the Liberty Jail. And so, yeah, it looks like it's in pretty rough shape here. And then we have the letter from Independence Jail, which looks like it's really in worse shape here. We've got the Joseph Smith translation of the Bible, and of course, the famous characters document. And so, so that's really interesting. So if you're in Salt Lake, and I know Deb was here about a week ago. Did you happen to see this stuff? No, you didn't? That's a bummer.
No. Yep. I got to come back.
Yep, you'll have to come back. I'll take you there. So so that was pretty cool. It was funny because when I went there, it was for general conference, and oh, I didn't show her picture there. I went with a friend named Anna Rolap. Anna is she's the main person who, so anytime you need a quilt or a period dress or curtains, like she makes it. She makes it as accurate as she can. She's amazing. And so it was weird because we had gotten tickets, which is like a pretty rare, rare treat. I've gone to general conference 2 or 3 times in my life. A lot of times they'll give it to a stake or something and you can go. But my wife got some, and so we went, and then so Anna has a sister named oh my goodness, why can't I remember her name? Sandy. And so Sandy and my wife are like best buddies, best friends. They're both flight attendants for Southwest. And then me and Anna, we're like the historian nerds. And so we happened to run into Sandy and Anna, And so Anna said, "Hey, let's go to the Church History Museum and we'll go check out the new things." And so it was funny because my wife and Sandy, they're not like history nerds like me and Anna. And so they were walking slow and we just like zoomed ahead so we could go see it really fast and spend as much time as we wanted. But along with the Rogers paintings this is the actual door to the Liberty Jail. And so so that's in Salt Lake City. That was part of the purchase as well. Got a really bad reflection on there, you can see, but yeah, they've got it in a big plexiglass. And I remember just thinking, because I know this was so hush hush, that what did they say? Hey, we need a plexiglass something or other that's going to have these dimensions, and we can't tell you what it's for. So it was just amazing to me that a month later they had the Liberty Door Jail and all the letters and the paintings and everything in a room, and it was just like I was just wondering, how did they put all this together in such secrecy? But they did. So that's there in Salt Lake City at the Church History Museum. Now, we can't talk about, we can, but we got to talk about the Book of Mormon in here. So across the street from, excuse me, not across the street, across the river from the Nauvoo Temple is a place called Montrose, Iowa. You can literally see from this, well, it's kind of a museum, more of a warehouse, the Phoenicia Museum, and you can literally see the Nauvoo Temple. At one time, they were going to get they had plans to purchase a ferry, because I will tell you from personal experience, even though it's only like a mile and a half across the river, there's not a bridge there, and so if you're driving by car, it's a 45-minute drive to go over to Iowa, and it would really be nice to either have a bridge or a ferry there. And but anyway, that fell through. But so back in April of 2023, I interviewed Jay and Jerry Mackley, and they are Heartlanders, I guess I would say, and they have a house in Montrose. I got to stay with them, and so I got a private tour of the Phoenicia Museum. And so I wanted to kind of show you. So in April 26, 2023, you can see the Phoenicia boat behind them. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Phoenicia, basically a man by the name of Philip Beale sailed this ship that they're reconstructing around Africa and ended up, well, he wanted to end up in all the way around Africa, which he did, but he was only 300 miles away from Florida because of the wind currents or the wind and the currents. And then he repeated the journey. So Heartlanders believe that Lehi sailed around Africa just like Philip Beale did and ended up in maybe Florida or New Orleans or somewhere in the Gulf there, which Philip said would have been easy to do. And then he repeated the trip in 2019, where he went through the Mediterranean, went through the Straits of Gibraltar, jogged down Florida a little bit, and then basically followed the same route that Christopher Columbus did all the way to Florida. So he proved that a 600 BC ship could travel from the old world to the new world. And so he got here right as COVID hit. They said, go back to England where you're from. We can't have any foreigners here. And so he actually cut the ship in half because he was going to ship it back to England because he didn't want to sail it back because he'd done that twice and it's not a fun journey. And the Heartland people purchased the ship and they are reconstructing it. And so you can see here back in April what the ship looked like. So the funny thing is they only had half of the ship when I went there. They have the other half now. And so I wanted to give you guys a little bit of a progress report on how they're doing. So this is me and my family, my two boys here, Brandon and Preston, and my wife, Wendy. And then Mike and Betty LaFontaine, I've interviewed both of them. They are basically overseeing the construction of the ship. So you can see that there's even more of the ship that was completed. This was on July 17th, 2024. They also had this horse head, which was probably, I think it was a reconstruction of what was on the original ship. And so yeah, they're making a lot of progress, but amazingly, so this is what it looked like on July 17th. I get newsletters from the Heartlanders, and you can see here they've got the entire hull now. It's completely built, and then they're starting up here. And so these photos are from, and you can also see here, this is Mike. Now I know Mike's not a tall man. He's probably 5'8" or so, I would say. You can see how tall, if we go back one slide here, that's what it looked like when I was there in July. And a month later, that thing is 3 times as tall as Mike now. And so, so that just gives you, you can also see here on the bottom right here, they've done some amazing job on putting this together. And so they're going to restore it. And you can kind of see this a little bit better now, the whole ship. And so basically, we saw about half of the bottom of the ship, and now they've really done a lot of progress. And they've even got the horse head on there. You can see they're installing the horse head on the top of the, I don't know, is that the bow? Or I think that's the bow of the ship, or the aft. I don't know. I can't tell you, but I'm not a guy. But anyway, so they've just done some amazing progress in a month. Like, this is amazing what they've done. So, so anyway, that is kind of your tour of that. Of course, the Phoenicia has nothing to do with the change in ownership. But let me see here. I think there's one question or comment here. Carol Kozowski said, "Is the Joseph Smith's translation of the Bible the same thing we call the inspired version?" Yes, yes, it is. And there was actually more. I didn't want to overload you guys with too many photos. But there was another photo that I had. I wonder if I could find it really quick. Let me stop sharing here for a second. Where, some of those photos were from the, sometimes Joseph would just make a word change here or there, but sometimes he would like add, a chapter or something. And so they've got those documents as well. So, anyway, I'll open it up for questions. I hope you enjoyed this presentation about the Kirtland Temple and Nauvoo properties and documents that were transferred between the community of Christ. Thanks, Paul, for inviting me on, and it was fun to talk to the group. In our next conversation, I'm excited to have Joe Geisner on the show. We're going to talk about lost Mormon documents, and we'll even talk about a conspiracy theory, the Spalding theory. So tell us about the lost manuscripts.
The one that everybody should know, this has an interest in Mormonism. Yeah, that's right. That's right.
You didn't talk about that. I wanted you to.
Manuscript lost, yeah. Well, yeah, and because I don't believe.
Do we want to get into that?
Well, I just don't believe it. I don't believe it.
Okay. Thanks for listening, and I hope you to continue to enjoy Gospel Tangents. Consider becoming a Patreon or go to gospeltangents.com/shop, and you can get a cool tie, a hat, or even a nice mug. You can also get a sweatshirt. So check it out at gospeltangents.com/shop.